Hello，佳俊。
Hello，
诶，我试一下你说试一下 background 的是吗？
哎，好啊，
好，咱们等一下他们其他几位。
好的，对，稍微等一下。
Hey, Judging.
哎，
Hey, hello.
哎，Hello，
That's good。诶
Who's Justin?
oh, Justin is from our team, so
Ah.
he, yeah. So I think we are waiting for one more person on the panel side. She told me she might be on the plane from Saudi Arabia to Hong Kong, so seems the plane seems to delay or something.
哎，我听不到那个他们的声音。
哎，Hello，能听到吗？
OK，可以了。
OK，好啊。So let's wait few more minutes, and so the other the other speaker might be on the flight from Saudi Arabia to Hong Kong. So she is always on the flight. So let me text her. So I think we can get started first. And thank you for joining, everyone. So today we will discuss about open source or not and the opportunities for GenAI startups in this wave. And this video is from Zoom webinar and also live streamed of YouTube. So we also have audience from YouTube live, and it's also being recorded and will be shared later. So we usually get a few thousand views on the YouTube channel after posting. So probably this one will be more than a few thousand. So yeah, so that's about the brief background about this meeting and so on. So first of all, I would like to briefly introduce the guest speakers here, and then I will hand them over and they will do a detailed introduction and share some of their stories. And the next section will do some panel discussions with questions. Questions related to the generative AI, open source, and the startups in this field, and some technology trend we see as well. And we will have some free discussions and Q&A sessions. Everyone can ask some questions and answers and so on. So yeah, and typing if you want to speak Chinese, I can help you to translate and so on. Yeah. So first of all, I would like to introduce Taibing. So Taibing is the founder and the CEO of Wondershare. It's a company for more than 20 years, and it's one of the leading company in content creation. They have almost the whole suits like Adobe, and it's market for emerging technologies, and also have software for the United States and for the Europe and so on. So welcome to join Taiping. Yeah. And the next one is David Forces, and David is also my PhD advisor, and David is pretty senior in the field of computer vision and AI and so on. And he serves as the advisor of the program committee of the recent CVPR, and is pretty close on following the trend in this field and what technologies are breakthroughs and popular and so on. And we have Yangqing here as well. So Yangqing is the author of Decaf and Cafe. So I still remember like the early days when we do all the deep learning, right? Everything is cafe based. Yeah. And later he went to Facebook, Google, and Alibaba, and now is doing his own startup on the infrastructure side. And Jia is also pretty senior in this field, and the work probably everyone knows is ImageNet, which is one of the key things to make the AI breakthrough. And Jia also works at Snap and used to lead the Google Cloud AI and so on. And Jia is a co-fellow and also co-founder of LeaveX. So yeah, that's the brief background of the guest speakers here. So I would like to give time to them, so each person can spend 3 to 5 minutes to do some intros of themselves. If they have some of their stories want to share, either generative AI related or how they build the business, and they can also share. So that's I'll give the time. So typing. So if you can get started, that would be great. So you can spend three to 5 minutes to introduce or share stories. Yeah.
Maybe I will be the last one.
Oh, you will be the last one? Okay. So
Okay.
yeah, no worries. So David, so do you want to go ahead?
Okay. Well, somebody has to start. So I'm David Forsyth. I've been working in academic computer vision for since 1984, which is really quite a long time now. I do a little bit on the edges of generative AI. Or generative vision. I've been very interested in it. Several of my students, Caden Lee and Jeff Zhang, have started a company, Reverie.ai, which is using generative methods to produce images of people wearing specific clothes, and that's applied in the fashion industry. I guess I was wondering about stories, so I have to be a bit careful because I wouldn't have thought of myself as particularly knowledgeable about open source, but I'll do what I can because of the whole academic thing. But I have a funny story about generative AI, which is one of the things I do is I am ombud for computer vision. So I deal with complaints and problems and irritations and stuff like that. And the ombud was contacted by a fairly cross workshop organizer who said, look, we got a problem. And I listened, and it turned out the workshop organizer had solved the problem. There was nothing really to do. But here is what the problem was, which is some referee had received a paper to review and thought that it was kind of hard work. So why not get a large language model to do the review instead? And the large language model, doing what large language models do best, wrote kind of the standard review for paper, which is it's not really all that interesting and it's been done before. And here is the reference that did it before. And because, of course, there wasn't one, it made it up. So that review was sent to the author, and the author discovered the paper didn't exist and the author went ballistic. The author was extremely cross. And there was a lot of correspondence between the author and the workshop chair. And finally, they got hold of the referee, and the referee said, oh, yeah, I did that. Gee, that seems to be a problem. So these things are working their way into our lives in odd and funny ways. There's some things where most people agree it's a good idea to use it, it's fair to use it, it's right to use it. And there are other things where, on the whole, when you hear that people did that, you just think, oh, gee, why did they do that? And I think that, the experience of the next 10 years or so is going to be working out what things you can and should do with this kind of technology and what things you really should not. So I'll pass the buck.
All right, that's a great story. So use LLM to review papers, right?
Yeah.
So that works out.
And the LLM faked its review, which was, I think, just hilarious. The author was very, very cross.
Yeah, like there's also case use LLM to go to the lawsuits, right? And they just find all the case that they referenced just never existed. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
Yeah, that's great. So Yangqin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I think so I kind of like started back at Berkeley actually doing computer vision. So incidentally, basically reading David's book and also the I think the baby eating bishop photo and things like that on the homepage. So yeah, so I basically I worked with Trevor. We started basically doing computer vision before deep learning was a thing. And then during 2009, 2010, basically there was the idea of sparse coding and things like that, which eventually started getting deeper and deeper. And so towards the end of the PhD, a bunch of fellow grad students and I, who are probably, grad students are the most productive people in the world. And we basically started writing the framework Cafe and basically open sourced the reference implementation of AlexNet, a bunch of others. And then I kind of started realizing that not only are algorithms important, the software that actually runs the algorithms are actually equally important as well. Because there was like this one famous PhD comics, I think, that basically says, basically for each paper, students basically spend like 2 or 3 months reproducing that paper before they can do anything that's useful on top of it. I think nowadays, I think people are kind of like taking it for granted, and there's new papers coming out, and people just get down to GitHub, Hugging Face, and things like that to basically, like look for implementations. And it's great because we then can basically find out the results, the effects, the goods and bads of different papers, algorithms within minutes in some way. I think back then, over the last 10 years, the academia has been a driving force, starting from the very first open source software, like say Torch, Theano, Caffe, MXNet, and a bunch of others, and gradually kind of like educated, if I may, educated big companies to fully embrace the open source world as well. So we see TensorFlow, PyTorch, and a bunch of other really great frameworks coming up over the years. And looking back at things, I think things are like really different. Back then, we had to basically re-implement all those kind of crazy things, from like say SIFT, right, the computer vision features, to like say LDA, latent digital allocations, which is terribly difficult to implement right. And today you just like import Hugging Face Hub and you get things done. So I think it's a driving force to make more innovations much faster.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I mean, definitely things becomes much easier, right? Especially for research, before you want to compare with others, it's so hard. And when everyone open source, it becomes much easier. But it also depends on the area, right? So I think in computer vision area, people open source a lot. But how about others?
LLMs,
infrastructure and these things, probably open source is even more, or?
I think infra has been doing a good job. I mean, cloud native has been basically mostly driven by Kubernetes, and one of my co-founders was actually the creator of etcd. So the whole stack of Kubernetes is very open source, and that dates back to like Linux days, where the whole operating system is Linux, right? It is like open source, right? So I kind of feel that basically AI has, it has always been open source to some extent. In 2001, there's this really famous library called Shotgun and libsvm that allows us to basically run SVM models, right? And I think it becomes particularly important nowadays because back then AI is basically a bunch of researchers' tools like us, like our tools, right? Which is kind of fine. But today, if everyone thinks that AI is one, being useful, and two, people are actually being afraid that AI might be doing something that, like that's beyond our control. I think open source is a good tool to basically, one, get these tools into people's hands so that they can get familiar with it. And two, basically having people more better understand what are the boundaries, what are things that it can do, and what are things that it actually cannot do, to basically demystify things. And demystification is always a good first step into a better understanding and better utilization of the new technologies. So I think that's like pretty good.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so how about you? You can make some introductions and share some stories or something. Yeah.
Before I introduce myself, I also want to echo Yanqing's mentioning about David's book, Computer Vision, A Modern Approach. For the older generation,
that's really great.
AI people like us, we studied AI with David's book. So a lot of really kudos to his effort for the advancement of the field. A little bit about myself. I'm an AI technologist. So the most relevant experience might be my time at Google. I was leading the full stack of enterprise AI product at Google Cloud. There is open source like TensorFlow, and there is also API and solution and cloud AI platform, etc., etc. It was there I realized how much AI could make impact to everyday life, and which motivated myself to be an entrepreneur and building companies as well as advising company like Heiko. So for me, I felt generative AI is very different than the past few waves of AI. If some of the experience that is related to open source. I don't know if it's caused by an open source, but for example, I was teaching generative AI and medicine earlier this year at Stanford School of Medicine, and because of the vast amount of tools and open source out there, my class, although it was hosted in School of Medicine, 85% of the students are from GSB or business school and other departments. So I think that's one reflection of how much people's knowledge, even not in the domain or not deep in the AI side, they actually can participate in making impact in the real world. And by the way, I believe over 90% of them want to create companies themselves. So that's one. And second, it was the most difficult class or course I have ever taught. Because in the past, you can prepare the course material and the technology won't evolve for a few years, right? And you can actually teach it for a few times using the same example. And generative AI, especially earlier this year, I prepared some benchmark, right? And I said, okay, like this is the state of art of this week. But when I start to teach about it, it was overperformed by another open source model already. That's how the field has been moving forward. And it's exciting, disruptive, and creates a lot of opportunities for everybody to have an opportunity to participate in this revolution.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the generative AI is a big thing in healthcare and medical, and everyone is crazy about it. I think I know lots of the students from business school, and they just want to create something amazing from it, and there are huge amount of opportunities outside. Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. So, Taibing, do you want to share some of your experience, intros, and yeah?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm start to express my opinion in Chinese. So look with my translator. 我核心讲3个观点吧。第一个观点，我觉得不管是在对于首先万兴来讲是一家长期在应用领域探索的这样一家企业，我们其实不太关注技术本身的进步，但是技术对应用来讲，其实是一个非常非常大的一个借力，特别是在 AI、GC 这样的一个时代。那我们过去曾经有一个，
我帮你翻译一下吗
？OK.
So yeah, so Wondershare is a company that mainly focuses on the applications. So it focuses less on the technology side, but the main focus is application and the product. And the AI has been very important for building a good product.
其实我自己对于 AI、GC 这一波，我实际上是有一个认知的。我觉得，如果说把大模型理解成为我们传统电力系统的一个发电机，发电机本身来讲，它能够给我们带来的应用，直接带来的应用其实非常有限。就像很多年前，我们可以用电直接去做照明，但是今天我们的对电的使用已经远远超越了照明，所以在中国会有。全世界都会有大量像通用啊、像美的啊、像格力这样的一些公司，其实基于电力系统做了很多很多的应用。那我认为在未来，我们的确需要像一些大模型去提供一些类似于电力这种基础设施，但更需要有些应用级的公司，像美的啊、通用啊、像这个索尼，这个索尼啊、三星啊这样的公司，提供一些基于电力的应用。那万兴就是在这块一直在做些努力。
Okay. So the large models and the large foundation models, it's like the electricity engine. So it's generating the electricities for the different applications and different usages. And Wondershare is actually more on the application side. So the usage of electricity engine is limited, but when you have the electricity engine, it generates electricity. It can be used in lots of different areas and power lots of application companies like General Motors and all kinds of electronic companies and so on. So the basic concept of Wondershare is they are more go to their application level and more on their rather they might not build their electricity engine themselves, but they want to build the best applications and the best products.
对，所以基于这样的一个设想，其实我们对 open source， 我们对开源其实非常欢迎的，因为它不但对于基础设施的构建以及终端应用，我觉得都是一个非常非常有利的一个助力。
So based on this understanding, so Wondershare is utilizing lots of open source and also lab open source. So it really helps them to build out lots of products and ship lots of the great features. Yeah.
好，谢谢。
Yeah, so that's the intro from Taibing and his basic ideas about open source. I think that's great. So basically, they are more focused on their applications and more focused on building products and utilize lots of open source projects to help them to build great products. Yeah. All right, so thank you. Yeah, I think that's great intros and great product. The next section, let's go to the panel discussions. So I have prepared some questions, and I'll ask some questions, and I think everyone can either take turns, or if you have some thoughts, you can just speak. So it's around the generative AI startup opportunities and around open source and so on. So the first thing is, I think open source has been very popular. Like even a company like Wondershare, they build on lots of open source technologies and open source things. But open source could mean very differently in different fields. But for us in the generative AI space, what is your attitude towards open source? And are you working on the infrastructure or applications? And do you think if you are working on infrastructure, your open source will be different and the application open source will be different? So basically, how do you position yourself and what's your attitude towards open source? Yeah, so David, for example, in academia, right?
Okay.
Most open source come from academia, right? I mean, companies don't do too much open source. Yeah.
Well, so it depends on the company. To my mind, I think it's wonderful, but I think it's a gift that eats. And my own impression is even now, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, depends on very specific details of an organization. I spent the weekend trying to install a particular visual transformer backbone that I wanted to fiddle with to look at a couple of issues for another book I've been trying to put together. And it took most of the weekend, and then it didn't do what it said it did. And then, the reason it took all of the weekend was all of the packages were incompatible with each other, and you needed this and you needed that and whatever. And open source makes it sound like it's easy, and it isn't. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that is really very, very hard. You also wonder, so there are large organizations that publish open source models and open source information and the like. And for an academic, you always wonder whether they're actually showing you everything that they should be showing you. Right. So there might be tactical reasons, for example, that someone would publish an open source example which wasn't quite what they thought was important. So it's just complicated. I don't have much more to offer than that, but I could see companies finding it both beneficial and costly.
Got it. So it might be misleading in some situations, or maybe it's very hard to use that well, right? Open source maybe not as well maintained as commercial products, just connecting and
there are some excellent traditional analogies. And one of them is the patent system and how should a company manage its IP. So one thing you can do is you can not talk about what you're doing and hope nobody steals the secrets. The other thing you can do is apply for a patent. Making that decision is often very hard for a company. Another thing you want to notice is there's a lot of study about whether the patent system is a good thing or a bad thing. And in fact, after years of legal study, most people argue that there would probably be no major economic impact if there wasn't a patent system. But given that we have one, making it go away is too hard. Right? So this is one of those things where actually making any kind of general statement about whether it's good and who it's good for is actually extremely difficult.
Got it. Cool. So open source do have some license and patents and these things, but it's very hard to check, right? Whether all the licenses are exactly followed. I know large companies, they follow more closely on the license and so on. And smaller companies, I'm not sure, but yeah, definitely there are lots of patent license and so on. Yeah.
And this is something that complicates relationships between large and small companies no end. It is possible, so there is no point in litigating against a small company because largely they can't pay. So, whatever, right? They'll go out of business. But imagine a big company develops a relationship with a small company. The small company has been a bit loosey-goosey about licenses, and the big company buys the small company. The big company could find themselves in an awful lot of trouble because they now own something that has done something naughty. And, it actually is something that creates all sorts of strategic complexities.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think, it's a complicated problem. Yeah. All right. So how about others? I think Yangqing, you work in open source space for a lot, right? Especially in the field that open source a lot. I think I heard someone told me that he's working in the database field, and he says database cannot survive if they don't open source, so nobody will use it. So yeah, I think it's a very, very interesting field. So yeah,
I kind of feel that basically like open source definitely pushes a lot of people to be open. I mean, GitHub, for example, I mean, if we think about it, before GitHub there was like SourceForge, which we probably, some of us might remember still, right? And in the recent days, I mean, SourceForge wasn't really like the de facto place where you find software and things like that. Today, it's just GitHub, right? It's way popular, and at the same time, it actually brings a lot of, as David suggests as well, basically like a lot of interesting, tricky situations that we might not realize, or we basically like took for granted in the past golden old days. One thing is basically there's a lot of what we call hit and run open source projects, right? Hit and run meaning you look at a GitHub repository, and then you see there's one commit, which is called initial commit, with 300,000 lines of code. And there is one README basically saying run.py. And you know that it's just not going to be useful. I've been in big companies, and there are actually, when things go interesting, there are big company teams that are actually using open source as one way to basically, write their performance reviews. And one person might write, my contribution of this quarter is I open source this library, and you look at it as like a hit and run open source, which is interesting. I think it's a fundamentally difficult question about how to evaluate the contribution and the importance of open source software and things like that, because all those effects come in a very slow fashion, right? I mean, when PyTorch got released or when TensorFlow got released, we never knew how big it could be. Right. It's only after a couple of years when we started seeing, like some of them are pretty good, some of them are pretty bad, and things like that. And I think, like it takes quite a lot of patience, and sometimes it takes quite a bit of honest but strict discussions to make sure that we're actually keeping a very good and positive environment to foster good behaviors in open source and basically try to discourage bad behaviors. And we can't really penalize because it's an open community. So basically, like you can only use positive feedbacks to basically promote good open source fashion, things like that. This is actually, I think, particularly true after I spent 4 years back in China. China is a very interesting place where there are extremely passionate engineers who actually love open source and created some really nice softwares. And at the same time, the culture, or basically the style that people operate, is still, a little bit kind of like similar to the early days of open source. So basically, like how to actually work together collaboratively, how to actually discuss things and tolerate different opinions and things like that. People are still learning that. So there's quite a lot of, like I would basically say, for better words, like some sort of mature guidance needed to basically like help this really passionate but young community to basically start contributing into the open source world. So I think, yeah, it's a very dedicated topic. We've done good things and we've done bad things, and we learn from that, basically.
Got it. Cool. Yeah. So is your company now the startup is doing infra, right? So
Yeah.
Is anything open source or it's all closed source?
Yeah, so the SDK is actually open sourced. So imagine if you want to run, let's say, like the Stable Diffusion model or a GPT-2 model or a Llama model and things like that. We basically, like you can just like pip install Elephant AI, and you can use that to like very easily run some of the stuff. There are things that we haven't really open sourced, and the reason is not really because we don't want to open source. It's majorly, the main reason is we don't really want to basically like maintain like establish a hit and run open source kind of what is that, like basically like we don't want people to feel that we are doing like hit and runs, right? I think a lot of people haven't realized that open sourcing a project isn't really a single decision, but it's kind of like a commitment over the next few years to actually foster it. Because if we really care about open source, we have a reputation to keep. So we're basically like open sourcing as much as possible, and then basically like building our other stack, mainly the infrastructure, the operations, and things like that, in a very open source friendly kind of fashion, using Kubernetes, using all those open source pieces, so that down the road, when we have, hopefully, the company takes off and we have more bandwidth, and then we can basically open more and more stuff down the road.
Got it. That's cool. I mean, I didn't know that you guys even open source your current company's code. Maybe not all, but definitely lots of it. So, that you mentioned the several years commitment. Are you still maintaining Cafe?
No, and that's for a conscious reason. So basically, I think that was I forgot what time. It was like 2018, something like that. So Cafe, Theano, and Torch, I think like the old three basically frameworks built by the grad students. I think we are all kind of like sunsetting them with the fond memory, because software evolved really quickly, and then like when TensorFlow and PyTorch came out, also backed by like large companies who have more money and more engineering resources, and also created by and maintained by the very set of people who used to be grad students and now in big companies, right? And I think like we're kind of like keeping those kind of like evolving mechanism, but I see Cafe and Torch and Theano as like a very interesting library piece, where if you're interested and if you go back, you can see some of the designs that kind of like gets carried over to the newer frameworks, such as compilers, like imperative computation patterns, Pythonic, Beam Pythonic, and things like that. So things evolve, and then we have some fossils and we have some new stuff, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. That's cool. So how about Jia? Do you what's your attitude towards open source?
Yeah, I think a lot of discussion has been around the model, the algorithm, open source code. I felt always we haven't paid enough attention to data, right? So there could be two aspects of data. One is, how do you know the open source models performance on specific problems, right? So far, there has been a lot of evaluation framework or metrics, which is fairly generic, right? We are still using blue score in cases. But different kind of applications, they might need different type of metrics, right? So for chatbot, versus how to say a copy generation approach in natural language processing, you might care about different aspects, right? So that's one. The other one is algorithm has been making a lot of progress, but if everyone is going to use the internet data, we're going to saturate the data perspective. If we can have even smaller amount of high quality data, right? So it might help the application impact significantly, but I think a lot of energy or effort has been invested on building algorithm that can compete on the standard benchmark or standard traditional metrics. Like sometimes what I heard is possibly because you're learning from the internet data, then many of the benchmark might have your training data in testing, right? So how do we handle all these? This is still a very new topic because thinking about learning from internet scale data, right? And how to effectively leverage all kinds of useful data and label, as well as metrics. I felt all these, there are still a lot of space for everyone to contribute and improve.
Yeah, I feel like data is usually you open source code, but open source data is less common, right? And now we are learning everything from internet. I guess Google have the most bet, right? So they are indexing the whole internet. So I think they probably have the most data. But I'm not sure how fast they move. So yeah. That's great. Taiping, I know that Wondershare loves open source and use lots of open source in project. So yeah, anything more you can share about open source? And I'm wondering how do Wondershare, because it's a very big company, right? Do Wondershare have labs or doing research and contribute to open source as well, or more on the side of using open source stuff?
这样其实我想表达几个观点。第一个观点就是 open source 到今年其实已经经历了很多年。我觉得在过去的20年 open source 已经发生了一个很大的变化。为什么呢？在过去我们面临一个什么问题呢？就是 source 本身就是 source code 本身就是软件。所以我们过去有 Linux 的 open source 的这个 SQL 的MySQL 是open source， 你会发现它这个东西只要开源了以后，它这个软件本身就是产品本身。但是到今天大模型时代就会有很大的变化，就是我开放的其实是我完成这套事情的方法，但这套方法本身它不代表软件。举个例子，就相当于说我知道怎么去造一个高铁。我知道去造一个高铁，跟我真正能造一个高铁，这里面其实有巨大的gap，它有可能是需要资金，可能是需要大的团队的运作，需要什么一系列的东西，所以这个我觉得是一个非常大的变化，这个变化也会引起其他的一些变化。
Okay.
这个我想讲。
Yeah, there are several points that he wants to add. First of all, open source has been a field for many years, and it involves a lot. At the early days, the typical open source is Linux, right? And you just use Linux to it's already a full software. It's a full stack of software, and you can just use it for whatever you want. But for in the field of large models and the foundation models, it's somewhat different because they are not a full software. They are not a full product that you can use immediately. It's just like you build railways and you have so many things to build around the engine and so on. So it's basically on the generative AI side, most of the open source, it's still like the engine and it's not a product. Usually people don't open source a product. In the old days, people open source a product. Linux is already a product. So that's the first point, yeah.
所以其实 open source 也好 ，closed source 也好，其实它本质上它不是一个目的，它的目的其实还是为了保护它的知识产权。那在过去我们之所以微软之所以变成了闭源，是因为他觉得我 Windows 的这个代码就是我的知识产权，如果我把这个代码开源了，那我的知识产权就得不到保护。所以那到现在来讲。所以过去通过开源保护它的知识产权，那现在我们应该在大模型时代又怎么样去保护我的知识产权呢？这里面其实刚才那位教授讲的很对，我觉得可能要通过一些专利啊，通过别的东西来保护我们对开源这块的一些知识产权。但是别的方面的知识产权在应用层面可能适当的可能还要通过闭源的方式来解决。
Yeah, so the key problem or the key things of software is still around the IP or patent. And so Microsoft didn't open source their operating system. It's also because they want to protect their patent. If they open source it, probably it will be very hard to protect it. And it might be depends on the field. For the large foundation models, there are so many open source, and how to protect the patent is definitely a big topic. And David Forsas gave a very good point about the patent license things in the open source project and so on. So yeah, so the patent thing is a very important stuff in open source. Yeah.
所以我也不认为未来所有的软件都将会开源，可能在于某一些领域，可能特别是基础性的软件，特别是跟大模型相关的一些软件，包括刚才这个讲的一些数据性的东西，它已经本身事实上已经开源了。那对于这些资产怎么样去保护它，我觉得可能是需要一个话题。但是对于应用层面，特别是 OneShare 的很多的应用的一些产品，我们可能还是会通过闭源的方式，因为它涉及到我们实现。利用这些技术以及最后产品化的一些，还是一些关键的一些方法，我们需要通过这些东西来保护我们的这个知识产权。
Yeah. So yeah, it's still about the patent and the IP, right? So closed source is still the best way to protect the patent and IP compared to open source. Open source already have license and patent, and especially on the application level. If you open source, it's very hard to protect the patent, IP, and so on. So and that's why for Wondershare, there are very few open source projects, because they focus on making applications, focus on making products. So most of the things are closed source, and they don't have much plans to open source the code and so on.
当然，我们因为我们聚焦在多媒体，特别是视频大模型这块，所以我们在利用开源社区去搭建我们的多媒体大模型的同时，我们也在为这个开源社区贡献我们在多媒体大模型这块一些代码。
Oh, so you indeed contribute. Okay, so yeah. So they actually make use a lot of the video and image models, open source models. And they actually indeed contribute some code to open source community. I think in application, the products more closed source, but they do contribute something to the open source community to do the better videos and images and so on. Yeah.
Yes. 好，谢谢。
All right, that's great. So that's that's great. So the next question will be, I think we already covered a lot of the topics to open source. So let's shift the gear and talk about the generative AI startups. So it's really a good time for startups because of the generative AI technology breakthrough in almost all fields, right? It starts with LLMs and then go to the text to image and text to video, text to 3D, and now it comes to the field of even large VM foundation models. So lots of new things coming out. But it's also a bad time for startups because the financial cycle, right? The financial cycle is not good and so on. So could you share some of your opinions for the where is the opportunity for the GenAI startups under this environment and situation? Yeah. So who wants to go first?
I kind of feel that maybe Justin would have more thoughts about it.
Interest rates.
Oh, so Justin is another moderator from our team. So probably we can go. So yeah, the other guest speaker, she's stuck on the flight from Saudi Arabia to Hong Kong. I think the flight got delayed, so she spent most of her time on flight. So it's pretty hard to schedule. So we will schedule another meeting, I think, just with her on a webinar, so we can better fit her time. So yeah, just ask here. Yangqing, maybe you want to?
Yeah, maybe I can talk about it. So I think, like we've been so as an infra kind of company, we've been basically looking into most of the recent development in the models and things like that. And I think there's there are two things that we observed. One is basically like the combinatorial effect of different kind of models, and the other one is basically like the product market fit. So in terms of the combinatorial effect, I think like we are having more and more, especially computer vision kind of tools and computer graphics tools that are becoming standard function calls. Imagine, in the past when we want to basically do like a visual saliency, or basically if we want to do like a detection or segmentation, that itself is one whole PhD's work or many PhD's work. And today, application-wise, there's still quite a lot of interest in technology and research problems to be answered. But technology-wise, you can basically say like install Dino or install segment anything, and you get a very nice segmentation mask, right? With that, then a lot of the generation work, such as like changing some objects in the photo and things like that, doing complex compositions, becomes much more easy. And I think like one thing that we're super excited about is basically like all those kind of models out there can now and are actually in a state that is much composable. And that's why we're basically building a bunch of, like the standard model services and to help people build in apps more easily, right? So that's like a lot of opportunities over there. Now, the challenge that we see today is, when we actually want to put things into productions, then the quality requirement, and especially the level of positive examples that comes out of production pipeline becomes quite important. And that's kind of like one problem that I think a lot of the startups and a lot of people are actually trying to solve. And I was talking to one of my friends back in the Alibaba days, one of my friends who's basically working on the e-commerce world, and they're using AIGC for basically like customer support and also for like say generation of contents of merchandises and things like that. Now they observe a non-trivial percentage of negative examples popping up, requiring human interventions and things like that. And it's basically, his quote is, if we have, if half the time people still need to intervene, then I think it's still in a lab phase and not production phase. So I think that's one thing that people are looking into in terms of product market fit. The most recent development of text to video generation has a similar kind of trend, right? We know that it's going to be hugely useful, hugely valuable, because there's a lot of contents. If you look at YouTube, there's a lot of contents we see that are videos. But the leading companies such as Stable Diffusion, the video diffusion model, the Runway model, the Pika model, and a bunch of other models are having interesting, promising potentials, and would probably still need a bit of time, half a year, I'm not quite sure, to reach maturity, reach the level of, like the enough percentage of positive productions and things like that. So I think, yeah, there's challenge and there is, like opportunities, and the next half a year will be particularly interesting.
Got it. So so the challenges you think in the mainland, for many technologies, the quality is not there yet, and you are pretty. It seems you are pretty optimistic, right? Half a year, they can solve the problem.
So, like, I think maybe Jai and I probably still remember our PhD days, where like image classification is, like 80% of the time it's working at 80% of the accuracy, and we just don't know what 80% of the time it is, and it never crossed the bar of being useful. But well, 5 years later, then like literally, like at the time of my graduation, I basically witnessed this like literally sudden drop of error rate, and it becomes like hugely useful. So I think, like a lot of the AIGC and well, LLM for the last year is another vivid example of things suddenly becoming very useful. So I'm hopeful.
Got it. So, David, how about your third? So I think we had a little bit discussion about your expectations about how the text video models will progress, right? So Yang-Qin mentioned it could be one of the large challenges, and the opportunities definitely things are progressing fast, and there are lots of open source to use and so on. One of the challenges is that the quality is not there, and but probably they will. How do you see this field move?
So technical challenges, and then it seems like there are two challenges here. One is sort of technical challenge. Actually, there are three. One is technical. The next one is money, and the third is the weather. So the technical challenge is mostly pictures look quite good, but if they don't do what you want, nobody knows what to do about it, which is kind of a bit concerning. And the minute you go from pictures to video, the whole thing is a bit embarrassing, right? So if you generate video of people, for example, their clothing changes from frame to frame, which is sort of ridiculous. And again, I think it's reasonable to say nobody knows what to do about it. The money challenge, I don't think gets as much attention as it should, which is, if you're going to make a stable long-term business out of generating images from text, you have to be able to make more money out of doing that than it costs to keep the GPUs warm. And it isn't obvious how you do that. That seems to me a hard and interesting challenge. The third one I would think of as the financial weather. There are kind of two, well, I'll mention two big variables, but there are a whole bunch of other ones. There are several big and scary wars going on. Imagine those get a little bit out of control. Interest rates will go up. If interest rates go up, a whole bunch of startups will disappear, right? However good their technology or anything else. Similarly, the Fed has been making noises that say maybe it's going to put its interest rates down because inflation is over. If it puts its interest rates down, startups are going to pop up like mushrooms. So, there's stuff like that going on. To my mind, it'll be the usual story, which is very few startups will survive a long time, and the ones that do will do quite well. And the positioning question, I guess, is to be sure that you're one of those as opposed to another.
Yeah, I think that's typically what happens, right? But in this field, if people describe it as iPhone moment, then it might be different, because when iPhone comes out, there are lots of apps grow very big, right? And if the GenAI is the iPhone moment, which means probably in each vertical, each application, there could grow up a company.
I'm sure. But the thing about an iPhone was it generated reasons that people wanted to pay to have it. The story about a lot of generative AI here is we're not all that sure what reasons are going to pay to have people are going to pay to have it and how much they're going to pay. And a whole bunch of those questions are going to have a really big effect on a lot of people.
Got it. So still about their willingness to pay and the needs and these things.
Well, imagine, so here's for example, imagine there really are GPU limits to large language models, meaning that if you want to get 100 words out of a large language model, that's going to consume some number of dollars worth of GPU time. The large language models will disappear if we can't come up with reasons to show that the words you get out of the model are worth more than the GPU time you pay for to get them. Right? There's sort of some really brutal economics operating here, which are going to bite at some point. It's entirely possible that there's an answer to that question, but I think that question is up in the air. One of the answers you hear to that question now, which I think is a very interesting one, is maybe these models don't actually require as much compute as we think, and it's just the way we built them. If we knew what we were doing, they would require less compute and the economic barriers would be smaller. And I find that argument extremely intriguing.
Yeah. So I think like quite many startups, I also heard the Dropbox story at that time. Their pricing is based on their expectation of the future storage pricing, rather than the current storage pricing, which means they believe the storage price will drop significantly in a short time, and it will drop very fast. So their pricing, for a very long time, their pricing is based on their expectation of the future price. So that's a very interesting story. And the GPU field, people probably will expect the GPU price to drop very fast, and the computation power is like increasing very fast. Then maybe some investors' point of view, they think it makes sense, right? Because they expect the price, the cost of the hardware to drop fast, and we can based on the future GPU cost pricing.
I think other people have more experience with this than I do, but I would say that I would project GPU prices to fall quite fast in a talk to investors. And when I was thinking about how I was actually going to spend the money I got from the investors, I would plan for the prices to fall rather slowly. I think it's very hard to get investment if you don't believe the GPU prices are going to fall. But once you've got it in your hands, I would spend it as if they were not going to fall.
Yeah, okay. So that's great. So Jia, how do you think about the challenges or opportunities for the GenAI startups now? So, yeah.
I felt there is great opportunity because of the vast amount of tools available, as well as the capability of generative AI itself, right? So look at Midjourney, look at Do Not Pay. All these are small companies with just a dozen of full-time, and they can build business around it thanks to the advanced tools available, as well as small teams that can move on a fast pace on innovating. So startups actually have an opportunity to outpace some of the big companies, especially if you're focused and you are looking at meeting the customers where they are, right? So find the good product market fit. I think there is a lot of advantage given the technology available. Just a simple example, right? My team used to build the Google Contact Center AI product. It's a lot of different functions that requires different machine learning technologies available, name entity recognition, sentiment analysis, and intention, classification, etc. And right now, large language model can unify many of those, right? So that's how technology can really shift the resource requirement. And also, if many people used to compare generative AI to autonomous driving, to AlphaGo, etc. If we look at the technology itself, unlike autonomous driving, you don't need to reach fully autonomous, and you can actually make business impact, right? So that goes back to how are you positioning your company or your product to meet your customers where they are, right? So there might be what Yanqing mentioned, okay, 70% accuracy product, but if you use it for generating a candidate for modification, right? So for example, generate an image candidate or video candidate for modification and leave the final touch to human. That might be feasible, right? Also, another alternative or possibility is focusing on really focused application where you really don't need to train a gigantic model to solve some specific problem, right? So think of if you have hundreds of billions of parameters that can teach a model how to cook and how to come up with nutrition information as well as how to answer math questions. But what you need is just to solve some specific, fixing a specific home management problem. You probably don't need to have all this knowledge about how to cook, right? So that's just some example, right? So first, you don't need to reach L5. And second, if you are focused on some specific problem, the problem might be easier to solve than, training a universally applicable model to meet everybody's needs.
Got it. That's cool. So yeah, I mean, the difference between the Gen AI and autonomous driving is autonomous driving requires like 99.999 accuracy, right? That's very hard for neural networks, but we don't need we don't need, and we can meet the customer somewhere in the middle. So yeah, that's a great thing. So yeah, Taibing, I know Wondershare is definitely not a startup, it's very big now. So but still in this generative AI wave, where do you think the opportunities and the challenges might be? Do you think it will be a field that it's an opportunity to pass some competitors along the way, or it's a pretty challenging space because so many people are doing this thing now? Or how do you think? Oh, you are muted. Sorry. Yeah, you are muted.
那个我创业已经有20年了，经历了这个互联网的 N 多个周期啊，所以现在我看到大家都在等着这个 AI 的 iPhone 时代、iPhone 时刻的到来，或者说大家都觉得已经来了，或者说还没来，或者怎么样。我就一直在思考一个问题：我们在任何一个行业的发展过程中，有那么多 iPhone 时代吗？有那么多的 iPhone 时刻吗？是不是因为我们这个 等一个本来就没有的东西，因为 iPhone 时刻可能在这个产业的发展过程中，它不会是一种常态化的东西。我倒觉得现在 AI 的发展，它本身是我们过去几十年 IT 技术的逐步累积，包括我们的这个算力的成长，包括我们互联网的提速，包括我们这些数据本身，最后一个自然而然累积的一个结果。所以基于这样的一个基础之下的一个我们的创新，我们的期待是不是可能不要那么急、那么快、那么大的一个一个创业的机会？我觉得是不是会是更好的一种心态？我觉得这是我想讲的第一个观点。
So yeah, so he has been working on startups for 20 years, so it's for a very long time, and I think he experienced many times that people say it's iPhone moment, and there might not be so many iPhone moments. So it's more likely it's not a sudden breakthrough. It's more likely the gradually accumulations of technology in the computation, in the algorithms, in all different areas, the long-term progress, which makes this change happen. So the expectation will be adjusted. So basically, we need to have some manageable expectations of this wave of the AI companies. So that's his point. Yeah.
所以我的观点是什么？我觉得 iPhone 时刻，我觉得不是一种常态。就像今天我们看到苹果有 iPhone 时刻，那我们假设去在中国市场，我们看一下，在 iPhone 之后有华为，在华为之后有小米。你能告诉我华为的 iPhone 时刻是哪一天？是哪一个产品？小米的 iPhone 时刻又是哪款产品？什么时候呢？好像都没有。所以我觉得在这个整个 startup 的过程中，我觉得应该这种渐进式的成长，也许可能会是更常态化的一个东西。那基于这样一个想法，我觉得我们现在整个创业 AI 的整体大的方向，我觉得是对未来我是高度认同。但是我们现在很多人对于 AI 对当下的改变太急躁，太快能看到结果，反而可能是一个问题所在。
Okay, so yeah, so iPhone moment is not that common, so it's rare in history of technology, and after the iPhone moment, right, there comes lots of other cell phone brands and so on. Is there also a moment or something like that? Maybe not. So it will be more likely technology will progress steadily, and he do believe that we have breakthroughs, and it's a good breakthrough. But maybe more on the steady side, things are definitely moving faster than before, and we are definitely moving to the right direction. But maybe things are not progressing and changing as fast as people expect.
我知道在硅谷有很多公司啊，都是希望有个great idea，然后或者是有一项非常好的技术，然后 VC 进入来以后，快速的发展，快速的 IPO。但在中国，其实中国也好，日本也好，其实还是有很多企业，它很多在整个的过程中，甚至说没有 VC 的参与，它 data up， 它逐步的往上涨，它也通过长线的这个发展，然后获得很好的成果。所以我是觉得这里面可能要去思考一下，就是大家更加理性的去看待 AI 对当下的影响，然后从更长的这个时间维度去探讨 AI 给这个时代、给这个社会所带来的新的一些创业机会，我觉得可能是会更加理性一些。
Okay, so yeah, so in Silicon Valley or United States, it's pretty common. Like you have you have a breakthrough technology, and lots of the venture capital money comes in, and the company grows very fast and quickly go IPO and so on. But this is not a very common case in other countries like China, like Japan. Usually it's not lots of investors put money in for one technology and the company quickly grows an IPO. That doesn't happen that common. And the more common thing is the company grows steadily, step by step by itself, and a lot of them even don't need investors' money. They become profitable, they have solid business, and they grow by themselves. That's more common for the business in China and Japan. So basically, what that means is probably the expectation and the things that we do will be more solid and more step by step.
所以，基于从硅谷的模式来讲，可能现在当下的这个融资环境的确不太理想，可能大家会觉得这个天气不太好。但是如果从中国的模式，从日本的这些企业的模式，那我觉得当下应该是最好的时机点。
Yeah. So from the US point of view, from the Silicon Valley point of view, probably it's not a moment that's very easy to do fundraising. Probably GenAI is already something good, but still not that easy compared to what typically happens in Silicon Valley. But if you look globally to other markets, it's very common, and actually the current opportunity is very good for startups to build a solid business step by step.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's great idea. So I'll ask one last question, and then we can go to some free discussions and questions and so on. So one last question, I'll ask something from the technical side. So I see there the article goes very popular these days. It's called large vision models, and it's from Berkeley, from Malik and Afros, and they call it now one large vision models can handle all kinds of tasks rather than before. It's more like the ChatGPTs for visualization. So David, I know you follow the trend, right? You're also friends with Malik and Afros and so on. Probably you already checked their work and also others. I'm not sure whether follow that or not. How do you think in the future, do you think we will progress to one vision, large models and handle all tasks, or that is more just get started and probably still a long way to go, or other thoughts about their works?
I think we are going to see a future with tons and tons of different models in it. Because as they point out, their models do everything, but they don't do any of the things that they do particularly well compared to specialized models, right? We're going to see models that exploit a payoff between energy consumption or power consumption or cost of computing against accuracy. We're going to see models that run at very high rates and pay that off again, and. By the way, I think it's important. The paper appears to have, at the very least, figure preparation errors in it, and it's likely that the authors are going to have to do some class of revision. You should look at figure 3, which is the training loss curve. There is something weird there, which is all the spikes for the 4 different colors actually follow one another. Now, my guess is that what's going on is somebody made some mistake somewhere in some piece of software or whatever. But what that means is somebody has to figure out what happened and cure it. I don't find the conclusion surprising, which is if you've got enough data, you can build a big vision model that'll do a reasonable job of an awful lot of stuff, but it often makes weird mistakes. The thing that I do find that doesn't work for me about this paper, to be honest, is it is still extremely weird to encode an image as a sequence of tokens. And the only reason they're encoding images as sequences of tokens is transformers did a great job on various natural language tasks. Therefore, if we can beat an image into a sequence of tokens, we can use a transformer, therefore, right? And I find that unsatisfying, to be honest. I think it's more likely that if we want one big vision model that does everything, it'll be organized in a somewhat different way than turn the image into a sequence of tokens and get on with it. But that's just a guess.
Got it. So you think the future of the video and images, we will have lots of specialized models,
Sure.
likely, rather than we have one model and do everything well, right?
Yeah. I mean, just because that's the way that engineering works. At the very least, there's going to be one for iOS and one for Android, and there's going to be one for Huawei's operating system, and then there's going to be one that runs on really small phones, and then there's going to be, there's going to be tons of that sort of stuff.
Got it. So that's interesting. Yeah, I think so. It's very hard to make everything into one model. In that case, if you have one model for everything, probably you don't need software anymore, right? Now, like the language model, they are already the LLMs. You just chat with it for everything. And yeah.
And it lies to you about references. Right? You've got to be careful, right? These things are dumber than they look. Right.
Okay. So yeah, so you think it's not a very big deal, so it's not going to work out. So you talk to them. So next time you meet them, you tell them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So anyone else have some thoughts about on the vision side? Are we progressing to lots of specialized models or one model for all? I mean, like text to video, technically speaking, they are trying to do one model for all, right? Taibin need to go on railway, so thank you for joining today.
Sorry, bye.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
So yeah, I like to basically chime in to basically kind of like say I don't think it's gonna be like one big model to rule them all, because I think like people always, I mean, naturally want like one single solution for the sake of simplicity. But if you think about like AIGC today, I mean, there's quite a lot of image to video or text to video models today. But if you look at it, people basically start with like describing individual frames, and then you model the temporal consistency and things like that. It's very principled and step-by-step kind of approach, or at least thought process, rather than basically saying, let me have a blind neural network that has this amount of input, and there's like this volume, which is the video output, right? I think like quoting Ilya, compression is actually one of the most beautiful things, hopefully for intelligence. And I kind of feel that compression has two notions. One is compressing data, right? But the other one is compressing models. If I basically, if you think about, there's like this challenge called compression challenge, and you have like 6 GB or something like that of Wikipedia data, and you want to basically see how much you compress it. Now, when it calculates the quality of compression, it calculates the size of both the compressed data and the code, which is basically the model, right? So I think, like if you're having this one huge model that's able to produce something, it's amazing, but it's a little bit wasteful. And being able to have an elegant description or concise description of things is always good. Now, of course, there are two approaches doing this. One is basically we manually find a smaller network, which we have done before, right? So from from AlexNet to BGGNet to Google's Inception model, that goes from 1 gig to 6 million parameters, and that goes down manually, which is a very nice effort. But if there are some algorithms that can look at itself and basically say, hey, now I can shrink myself into a smaller model and find that model architecture, that'd be super smart and super good, right? There's a bunch of work that's along this kind of work, basically like NAS, neural architecture search and things like that. I mean, that was a few years ago. And I think today, because of the huge success of the language models, we kind of put aside a little bit the model compression problems, or basically the model size problems. But research-wise and also application-wise, my prediction is that in maybe a year or even sooner, we're going to be looking at like more vertical models, compressed models and things like that to basically strike a balance between quality and size, or even smaller size with high qualities. That's my prediction.
Got it. So yeah, I think it's still probably the large VN models is not a good idea. Yeah, or probably it's too hard. So yeah. That's great. So I think any topics that you guys want to discuss before we go into the Q&A?
I'm all good.
I think Q&A is good.
Sounds good.
All right. So anyone has some questions can just raise hand or put it into the questions and so on. There's a question asking about Wondershare. So I'll ask him after the meeting, and maybe he can share some thoughts about it. Yeah. So how can government policies support or hinder the growth of GenAI startups in the open source ecosystem? So government policies and GenAI open source, will it be regulated or probably related to license? I don't know. So any thoughts about open source ecosystem and government regulations?
Yeah, I don't know. This sounds like a pretty interesting but tricky question that no one has answers to. I mean, there's a big debate between being open and being closed right now, with quite a lot of, let's say, geopolitical and such situations involved. Like, well, taking those things apart, my feeling is that like being open has always, like, we always want to basically like give open source side a bit of like benefit of the doubt, or basically like support. Because, I mean, in the old days, when there was nuclear weapons, and I'm not saying nuclear weapons is a good thing, it's a bad thing, right? But there was a period where basically the government was very strongly censoring any kind of things that's related to nuclear technology. Now, then there was one dude, one journalist, who basically looked into all those public documentations and actually published a book saying, hey, you know what? Based on all this public information, this is how you can, this is the closest we can get into making a nuclear bomb. And that made the government extremely embarrassed, because, like the so-called censorship and things like that eventually became, like in vain. And I think in terms of science, I mean, one thing that I strongly agree with, the pioneers like Yang Legun and Fei and folks, is that AI is not as destructive as right now the media paints. I mean, what would happen if someone draws a bad version of Mona Lisa, right? If we basically give the public more knowledge and more access to the open technology, then we have a better understanding of what is going on, what kind of things are authentic and things like that. I mean, if we were a really like primitive tribe, then we become much more prone to all kinds of like voodoo and stuff like that. But with more scientific education and exposure, then we start building a more logical and more reasonable thought process, and that actually guards the whole society from like suffering all kinds of like bullshit statements and things like that. So I think open source is always pretty good. That was my kid, by the way. So
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the important aspect is how to govern, how to set up the policy, or how to evaluate, right? So you could say, hey, like, we appreciate more on the safe AI aspect. And right now, like, there are so many companies that they are evaluating the approach themselves, or evaluating on open data that might be contaminated already, and they say, okay, this is a more secure or more safe approach, right? So I think it's not about the question of in the case of black or white, right? It's about how to constructively foster the advancement and minimize the negative impact. I felt still all different personas, the regulators, the AI experts, and the business side, etc., etc. It needs collaboration to navigate this forward.
Okay. Yeah. David, do you have some thoughts about government regulations on open source, or not really?
So I really take the earlier point very strongly. I think it's a very important point, which is it's really pretty hard to blow up a city with a generated AI picture. It's just not the same kind of thing. I think the evidence is quite good that people can be
but language can, right? If you use large language model to build a robot,
no, people can be persuaded to hurt each other using AI models, but the model itself is not harmful. And I really like the argument that says people need to get smarter about and better informed about what they read and what they see, because it might not be right. I think that's probably what has to happen. There are areas of regulation where things are going to get interesting. There's a whole bunch of stuff about, imagine I blend a real person's face onto a generated image of a person not wearing any clothes. That's probably an offensive act. It's certainly asking for regulation or civil litigation or something. And we're sort of living in a world where nobody quite knows what to do about that sort of thing. I think there's a consensus that it's not very nice, but there's not much in the way of frameworks or ways to address it. I think we're going to see a whole bunch of that happening. People are going to figure out ways to regulate it, or try to figure out ways to regulate it, try to figure out ways to litigate. My guess is whatever the government says, mostly it doesn't know what people are doing. And the best it can do when something happens is sort of panic and regulate the wrong thing, because things are moving so quickly. It's just not, it's not the kind of thing that government responds terribly well to. We'll see, but I don't think there's much hope that regulation will make the world safer. And I don't think there's much that regulation can actually regulate successfully in our area.
Okay, sure. Yeah, because things are moving so fast, right? Regulations are very behind. So yeah, in a typical world, I think in the United States, lots of regulations came out 10 years later. So regulations are pretty behind in the US, which is good as well, because a lot of innovation, they don't want to be regulated at the early time. So in some countries, regulation comes earlier, but in United States, regulation usually comes like 10 years later or something. So yeah, I have a question here, says, what's your thoughts on the impact of the Algorithm Accountability Act and the rules AI researchers can contribute to? So do we hold the algorithm accountable? I don't think that's what's happening, right? So yeah, how do we have any thoughts about these things?
No opinion from me.
Yeah, I have to read through that, and not too much knowledge about that one.
So, I think I read something before. It's like, basically, if an algorithm, basically it's a tool, right? If it's a tool, then the content created from that tool, whether the tool needs to be accountable or not, right? A typical case is, I think I read on internet, it's for example, a tourist write their attack plans using Microsoft Word. And should Microsoft be responsible for that? No, Microsoft don't be responsible for that. And so in order to protect Microsoft, United States actually have some legal things to say, no, whatever you created, or they don't hold the tool accountable. And the thing is, in this generative AI wave, probably people think a little bit different, especially the language, the images, the videos are created, are output from the tool, like text to image, text to video. I'm not sure, there is no regulations here yet, I think, but based on the previous things about what happens to the tools are not accountable, and I'm not sure like whether the algorithm is accountable or not.
Yeah, I think the prospect of holding an algorithm accountable, it's not something I would worry about. It might happen. It's not going to happen anytime soon, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took a quick read about whatever kind of things I can find. So there are a few terms that are actually kind of like associated with that. One is actually kind of like introduced in the House in 2019 called Algorithm Accountability Active 2019. And that basically says, like the systems that use personal information to make decisions, like say recommendation systems and, like say ranking systems and things like that, need to basically evaluate whether these systems are being fair in using the knowledge and stuff like that. And there is a more recent kind of build in 2023 that basically says, it kind of enhances, like basically the notion that when AI is used to assist people making choices and stuff like that, we need to take kind of like a more careful kind of like view into whether there are implicit biases introduced into it. I kind of feel that in general, in principle, like it looks about right. Basically, the principle of the bill is to make sure that fairness actually being upheld and not accidentally buried into the algorithmic side of stuff, which is kind of similar to basically like the regulation to like say insurances and things like that, right? The detail about how to implement that and things like that, there's quite a lot of like nitty-gritty details that I can't read in a couple of seconds. So yeah, I think that's my read.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think we are over time, so we'll probably stop here, and the video will be it's live streamed on YouTube, and after that it's being recorded as well. So we will share it on the online, and I think you can revisit, or if you have more questions or something, you can also email us, and if you have a specific person you want to ask to, we can also help you to forward. Yeah, thank you.
Super. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank
What an
you.
interesting evening's chat.